Hello, I'm Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Monday evening in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I'm filling in for Eric Snodgrass today. I thought I would start today despite having some things to talk about in the long-range weather forecast. We do have quite a few events to cover here just in that immediate 1 to 2 day forecast here. This is the all hazards map from NOAA, valid here on Monday afternoon. You can see a lot of activity going on across the country. It's really kind of a tale of two halves of the country here right now in terms of storm systems. We have a powerful nor'easter developing off the coast of New England in the mid-Atlantic. We haven't seen a lot of those this year. We were kind of waiting for them. We saw some hints or possibility of that potential here in mid-March, and we're seeing that come to fruition. Behind that, we see these winter storm warnings up through New England, but behind that we have a strong cold front. That's bringing those freeze warnings and freeze watches through the south, or at least the mid-south through the deep south here. These indigo colors with the freeze watches in light blue here. Then I will jump you over to California. We have another atmospheric river event moving into the west coast overnight tonight into tomorrow. A number of impacts associated with that one. Flood watches are out. High wind warnings are out there over California. The winter storm warnings for the Sierra Nevadas. We will cover the details of that here before we get into that long-range forecast. Start talking about what we might be seeing in April here. I think we can sum up the immediate next 48 hours by looking at this water vapor loop, the satellite imagery here across the United States. There's a lot going on here, but where my eyes are drawn to is this large upper-level trough. You can see kind of this U shape and the water vapor signature here. That's the deep upper-level trough moving into the eastern part of the United States. That's bringing that cold air through the mid-south and into the deep south, prompting those freeze warnings we just looked at. And then off the coast of Virginia and North Carolina, you see these clouds developing here. This is the nor'easter we just talked about developing in the Atlantic Ocean just off the eastern coastline. That's going to be a big newsmaker, a big weather maker for New England over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. I jump over. This is looking at the 3-kilometer high-resolution NAM forecast. We'll just go across the next 48 to 72 hours here and take a look at what we're working with. Just overnight tonight on Monday, if we look off the east coast of the United States, you can see that nor'easter deepening and developing off the New England coastline. Heavy snow expected to build in overnight into parts of New England, parts of New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, far western Massachusetts. In fact, some of these areas already seeing light snow, or at least a wintry mix here this afternoon as those temperatures slowly cool overnight, expecting that to transition into snow. And then that low pressure system will actually occlude, kind of wraps up on itself. You can see it lingering off that New England coastline, lingering right off the coast of Massachusetts on Tuesday and Wednesday. This could be a long duration, high impact event, bringing high wind gusts. I think those will be a concern along the immediate coastline of New England, Maine, New Hampshire, the Boston metro area. The winds won't be as high in the interior, but that area will just have received a lot of wet, heavy snowfall, potentially 1 to 2 feet of snowfall in some of the elevations or mountain ranges up there in New England. That's going to be a power outage, tree damage risk as we go through the next 3 days. Taking a closer look at this is just the radar valid over the last few hours here for New England. We can see snow showers, rain showers already moving into parts of New York, depending on where the temperature sits. We're really about 32 to 37 degrees Fahrenheit across the state right now, depending on whether you're in a higher elevation or a valley area. Expecting these impacts to increase overnight tonight into tomorrow as the system wraps up and develops off the New England coastline. You can see that really from the 3-kilometer NAM here as I take this through Monday night. You'll see the system developing far off really the New England coastline, but as it occludes, I mentioned, kind of wraps up on itself. That brings that low pressure system retrograding all the way back, really just off the coast of Massachusetts when we're expecting those wind gusts to really pick up along the New England coastline here, potentially talking 55 to 60 mile an hour gusts, maybe even exceeding that on the immediate coastline area. That'll be a concern in terms of power outages. We're expecting high snowfall from this as well. You can see the wind gusts here, maximum estimated wind gusts from that same 3-kilometer NAM model over the next 3 days here. As that low pressure system deepens off the coast of Massachusetts, that's when we're expecting those wind impacts to be at their greatest. Taking a look at snowfall totals, it's just from the ECMWF. See 1 to 2 feet of snow potentially in these kind of pink areas here, and then top of that color bar, really focused on some of these higher elevation areas. So the Berkshires, the Green Mountains in Vermont, the White Mountains of New Hampshire, Adirondacks, the Catskills in New York, as we're expecting some of the most significant snowfall from this event. But even getting in towards some of the metro areas, Springfield, Massachusetts, all the way over to the Boston metro area up the coastline, we could be looking at anywhere from 3 to 8 inches, depending on where exactly that rain and snow line sets up and we'll see which areas get the most snowfall out of this. But it should be an impactful event, both in terms of snow and wind, as we get a proper nor'easter moving into the New England area. I mentioned those colder temperatures moving through the south and the mid-south. Really the concern there is tomorrow morning, early on Tuesday. If I take this out to 6 a.m. Tuesday Central Time, this blue color here, that kind of line of demarcation, that's where we're expecting temperatures 32 degrees Fahrenheit below. If I just kind of draw that area here, all the way through the deep south, we're expecting freeze potential and frost potential. Certainly North Carolina, the highlands of South Carolina, Alabama, Birmingham, and Tuscaloosa, both expected to be 31, 32 degrees Fahrenheit overnight lows, respectively. Atlanta, forecast down to 31 degrees Fahrenheit. All the way over through eastern and northern Arkansas, expecting freezing temperatures. Low temperatures overnight like this, they're hard to forecast. They're tricky. Anything like a 29 degrees Fahrenheit freeze, that's going to be more impactful than something like a 32 degree Fahrenheit freeze. So those kind of 1 degree temperature changes can be finicky, but they're hard to forecast, but a lot of the impacts can come about just from a few degree temperature change. So we're keeping an eye on that area overnight tonight. Wednesday morning, this low pressure system extends off the East Coast. Not expecting temperatures to maybe be quite as cold as they were Tuesday morning, but I expect those freeze warnings and those frost watches to stick around because we are expecting, again, temperatures to approach 32 degrees Fahrenheit in that Atlanta, Birmingham, parts of the Delta as well. Maybe not quite as deep as we saw on Tuesday morning. Nashville, both mornings certainly expected to get around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even 29 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll see about that. If I jump you over to the Pacific, we talked about tale of two halves of the country here. We are seeing yet another atmospheric river develop off the east coast of Hawaii. This is kind of that classic Pineapple Express type event we talked about earlier. In fact, if we look at this water vapor, this is looking at total precipitable water, satellite-derived product for the Pacific Ocean, valid again right here on Monday afternoon. If we look off the eastern part of Hawaii, we can see this source region of moisture developing. You can really draw a line from the tropics through Hawaii, extending over toward California. Over the next 24 hours, this atmospheric river will continue to extend all the way to the coastline of California as we pick up the wind gusts and the heavy rain and snowfall for the west coast yet again here over the next 24, 48, waning on day 3 here as we get into the day on Wednesday. We can visualize this another way, but looking at water vapor transport off the Pacific, that's what this product shows us here. As we go through the night tonight, that really maximizes just off the coast of California tomorrow morning. We're talking March 14th now, Tuesday morning at about 4 or 5 a.m. Highest water vapor transport now moving into the coastlines of California. That's where we're really expecting this event to begin very early overnight on Tuesday. Can't rule out some rain showers moving in even here this evening on Monday. I think this event will really reach its peak, though, as we get into the lunch hour on Tuesday, lingering all the way through Tuesday night into Wednesday. It will shift the impacts as we go throughout the day on Tuesday into Southern California in terms of the rainfall and the wind, but really looking at a potential 2-day event again here out west, unfortunately. Another way we can visualize this, just looking at the time series of that water vapor transport over the central coast of California here. See, again, peaking in intensity midday tomorrow. That's March 14th, waning on the day of Wednesday. And we're looking at a potentially moderate to strong atmospheric river event yet again, similar to the last one we saw on Thursday and Friday of last week. Now this one, we're expecting it to be a little different with regard to wind gusts. Last week we had some high winds, but not nearly as widespread. The impacts not as significant. This event expected to be a little bit stronger in terms of that low pressure system coming on shore in Northern California. That will increase that wind impact. 50, 60 mile an hour wind gusts possible along the central coastline, anywhere from San Francisco down south through Monterey, the Watsonville area, even areas further south along the coastline from there. Another area that I'm concerned about, the Sacramento Valley. See 50 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts possible in the northern central valley here, an area where the soils are already saturated, could see more significant tree damage, which could yield more significant power line and power outage issues across the state of California as we get into the overnight hours tonight into early Tuesday morning, something we're keeping a close eye on. Looking at the specifics of this event, in terms of snowfall. We are expecting significant additions to that Sierra snowpack, where we're already reaching record levels, certainly in the southern Sierras. This will be an impactful event in terms of snowfall, but only at the highest elevations. This is another, what we call a warm atmospheric river. So the snow levels being pushed up to as much as 8,000 feet, maybe even more than that. Still getting significant snowfall above those levels, but I think the bigger story right now is wind and rainfall out of this, especially on the heels of that atmospheric river event we just saw last week on Thursday and Friday. Precipitation from this event, again, maximized in those Sierra foothills, an area that we're concerned about in terms of flooding, just with all the creeks and the topography in that area. We've even seen some evacuation warnings in some of the foothills near some of those reservoirs as the spillways have opened up as a precaution for this next event here. The coastal regions of California. This is an area I'm very concerned about. The Salinas River Valley currently has flood warnings on it right now from the last event. We're expecting that to be another issue as we go through this event here. The Pajaro River broke through a levee at one point over the weekend. And that's an area where we're now putting more water on top of already high water levels. Those have receded some since Saturday, but we're starting at a higher base level in terms of those river and creek levels, and that's just going to exacerbate the flooding levels, I think, for these coastal areas, which we're expecting from this event over the next 48 to 72 hours, 4 inches, maybe even more. We're talking 8 inches potentially in some of the coastal mountain ranges as you get up into some of the elevations here. All the way through Southern California, where Los Angeles might see 1 to 2 inches from this event later on Tuesday. So a widespread water event in terms of more rainfall coming to a state that's had too much recently and has rivers and hydrology stressed from the recent rainfall. Look at the GFS, just a little bit different look in terms of the precipitation totals. See, again, the highest values of equivalent precipitation, certainly falling in the Sierra Nevadas, but significant 4 inches plus expected in some of these coastal areas and even up through Northern California as well. I mentioned those reservoirs. We had spillways open over the weekend. You may have seen these on the news. Anytime these videos come out, the authorities announce these spillways opening up. It can cause some concern or panic, but right now I think that's mostly as a precaution. We're not expecting significant stress on these reservoirs right now. I think it would take a sequence of these events to get to a point like that, but nonetheless, we have seen some evacuation warnings come out near some of these, so we certainly recommend you heed any of the advice from your local authorities as far as the reservoirs and river flooding. We talked about that record snowpack in Southern California. We can see that here if we look at the southern region of the Sierra Nevadas. This blue line is where we're at this year in the 2022-2023 water year, and we've exceeded that record from 1982 and 1983, here even on early March. So we have a ways to go here in terms of this water year. Just an impressive year that we've had in terms of water and snowfall and ice out west, expecting that to continue at least over the next 48 to 72 hours. We'll look at the long-term forecast to get an idea where that might be going. I will say the snow water equivalent being 250% above normal right here this week. We will warm up temperatures in California. I mean, we're in the northern hemisphere. As we go through March, we go through April, we go through May, those temperatures are going to warm up. They'll be above freezing, some of these upper elevations, and we'll start to melt this record snowpack that will move through those streams, creeks, reservoirs. And those river levels are going to be heightened for a long time, potentially the next 8 weeks or more, which just keeps kind of a heightened concern for flooding sticking around in the state, unfortunately, for the next 2 months or so. That's just going to be something we're going to have to watch week to week as some of the snowfall melts and moves in. If we take a step back here and look just at the last 30 days of rainfall across the entire United States, we talked about the excess rainfall out west. You can see it kind of going off the color bar there in California. The eastern U.S. has seen a lot of rainfall. The Corn Belt was an area where we were concerned about low soil moisture levels earlier in February, kind of going into March. That's less of a concern now as we saw more rainfall move in over the last few weeks. We are seeing some dry areas throughout the south. We're expecting some more rainfall kind of in that Gulf Coast region, so I'm not terribly concerned about that. An area that does need some rain, though, is Texas and some of these plain states where we're continuing with drought at the moment. So we are looking for some of that rainfall in the forecast. I think there's some hint or signal there just over the next 2 to 3 weeks or so, and we'll take a look at that here in just a minute. If we take a look at the drought monitor, the big story here is the Central Valley of California has been almost entirely removed as of drought status. Again, we were coming across really 2 years of significant drought in California, so that's good news to see. There are other areas out west where we're trying to get more rainfall, more snowfall in. Certainly in the northern Colorado Rockies, parts of Oregon have been dry this winter, or at least relatively dry compared to what they usually get, so hoping for some improvement there. We talked about the plains, Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, an area that missed out on some of the recent rainfall in that map we just looked at. So we'll be looking for some rainfall there in the forecast in Florida, which had a drier start to 2023 as well. Take a look at those soil moistures, valid as of March 13th here. Talked about the Corn Belt, the Eastern Corn Belt. It's an area that's still dry right now, but we have improved this to a large degree. We're expecting more rainfall here in the forecast just over the next month or two. Not terribly concerned about drought redevelopment there. Certainly been very wet in the southeast, save for the immediate Gulf Coast in Florida, and then we can see those dry soils extending into the plains where we have that drought existing. See some of these drier levels up here in the northern plains. We have a lot of snowpack up there. That's going to melt, similar to California as we go through March, as we go through April and warm up those temperatures, expecting improvements as that occurs. As I take you through the ECMWF, this is the precipitation forecast. We'll just go across the week here. We talked about the nor'easter in New England. We talked about the atmospheric river event in the west. We do have a developing system coming off the continental divide associated with that atmospheric river event that just came on shore in California. Expecting another potential winter storm in the northern Corn Belt. This is valid as of Thursday evening into Friday. I'm expecting parts of Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, maybe parts of Iowa as well included in this, to see another significant shot of snowfall, potentially talking 6 to 8, maybe even 12 inches, a whole foot of snowfall as we go through Thursday into Friday associated with this event. On the southern end of it, areas that have not seen a lot of snowfall this winter in the Corn Belt, Central Corn Belt or Eastern Corn Belt, well, that story continues with some potential storms as we go further south. We'll get into the severe details of that later on in this week as it becomes more clear. But that's the next big weather story in terms of the U.S., is that snowstorm developing up in the northern Corn Belt with rain coming through Central Corn Belt, parts of the Mid-South, the Southeast, even all the way through the Gulf Coast, an area that we just saw was dry over the last 30 days. Looking at snowfall totals from the ECMWF, this is from the 0-0 run. Let's see if we can update that with the 12-0 run, valid as of this evening here. Take that out through the week here. You can see significant snow potentially moving through the northern Corn Belt, northern Wisconsin, parts of Minnesota seeing 8 inches plus, maybe even more than that in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's kind of yet to be seen where this axis of snow might set up through Nebraska and Iowa. The models have been jumping back and forth. This 12-0 run here, I think, removing a bit of that snowfall there. Not uncommon for a more powerful or dynamic storm system like that snow axis to shift around a bit as the model keys in on that final axis of snow. If we take a step back and look at the 10-day precipitation anomalies, obviously we can see the high impactful event moving in out west. Much of the precipitation signal you see there is biased, again, toward the next 72 hours or so. There's also that Gulf Coast rainfall that we're expecting out of the system at the end of the week. Snowfall up in the northern plains, or at least the northern Corn Belt. Relatively drier between those two, right between the southeast, between the northern plains snowfall. That's a story that we saw earlier this year, at least with the Corn Belt, Eastern Corn Belt trending drier. I think we do get precipitation in here. It's just a rainy time of the year climatologically. So it takes quite a bit to get us toward average. We got precipitation over that same time period. We see a big cold minimum in the northern plains, Montana, the Canadian Prairie, North Dakota, parts of South Dakota as the storm system comes up through the Midwest, curls up here. It'll bring a cold front through here, and a big high pressure system is going to develop over the northern plains. That high pressure system will calm the winds down. If you get calm winds overnight on a thick snowpack, you can really crater those temperatures. So expecting a single digit or below, potentially below 0 degrees Fahrenheit as we approach and get into the weekend here in the northern plains. So that's something to keep an eye on with really colder temperatures throughout much of the lower 48 all the way down through the deep south, as we saw on a few slides earlier in this video. Thinking about that week 2 pattern, when we do that, getting out into next week, I like to look at the global, the GFS ensemble. If we start this, let's start this all the way here, valid as of Monday evening, the recording of this video. You can see the system moving on into the west coast here. That's that atmospheric river event that will amplify, develop into the Midwest. There's our snowstorm moving into Minnesota on the northern side of this low pressure system here. Rainfall and storms further to the south. As that moves through the weekend, that ejects off the east coast of the United States. We have another extension of that Pacific jet stream, potentially focusing yet another event on California getting into early next week. Now, this is a bit further out. The details of this exact event are unclear as of yet. We are seeing a consistent signal from the GFS ensemble and the European ensemble that will have this southern extension of the jet stream through the lower 48. That'll bring cooler weather to the interior of the U.S., potentially shift the rainfall axes further south through the southeast, the deep south up through the Carolinas. Again, the specifics of this looking out a whole week out into next Tuesday. The details aren't there yet, but it is a general agreement that we've seen. If we jump over and look at the European ensemble for the same time period, bring this back to Tuesday, March 21st, see onshore flow in California, increasing precipitation potential here over that 6 to 10 day time period. Southern extension of the jet stream through the lower 48, that'll bring cooler temperatures just to the north of that. And then underneath this jet stream flow, we'd expect some precipitation anomalies to continue there. Take a look at the Climate Prediction Center. Let's see if we see an agreement in the forecast with that jet stream pattern we just saw. If we look at the 6 to 10 day, there's that maximum precipitation anomalies over the west with that onshore flow. We talked about that southern extension of the jet stream. Underneath that, we keep rainfall anomalies or chances heightened, potentially getting some rainfall into West Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. That would be good news for drought-stricken areas over there, and good news for Florida if we get some rainfall into some of the drier areas here heading into spring. Temperatures across the lower 48 will remain cold. We talked about that lower extension of the jet stream, that southern extension. Good agreement between the European and the GFS with that. So high confidence that the next 6 to 10 days, even beyond that, will be colder as we go through the third and fourth week of March. If we looked at 8 to 14 day, outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, continued cold out west. Part of that is the existing near record snowpack, just keeps temperatures cooler, all else equal. We do see something of a weak wet signal out west with a attendant wet signal on the other side of the United States here in the southeast. The details here a bit murky as we kind of figure out where that jet stream exactly will set up in that kind of March 20th to 26th timeframe, really getting into late next week. But the potential exists there for more rain out west, unfortunately, and more rain in the southeast. If we look longer term, this is looking at a monthly forecast from the ECMWF weeklies. These came out at the end of last week. This is looking from March 20th to April 20th. And I'll note two things that jump off this map to me. The first is the maximum precipitation anomalies forecast for the Mid-South, the Deep South, and extending up into the Central Corn Belt. We see this risk for tighter planting windows across the Central and Eastern Corn Belt, down through the Delta. This was a concern. We're starting March cold. We've been wet. We're continuing to see that. That's going to keep windows tight as we get into April, try to open those up. In terms of temperatures, we don't want to keep this wet signal lingering around. So this is a concern as we go through April. We are talking 30 to 40 days here in terms of the forecast. The precipitation will not ultimately look exactly like this, right? We can't be too specific, but there is a general concern for wetter signals across the central, eastern, and southern corn and soybean belt right now. Something we're keeping an eye on in terms of, unfortunately, just a risk for tighter planting windows as we get into April. Some good news for the west is we're not seeing a large or significant precipitation signal out west. Kind of a mixed signal, maybe even drier in the Sierra Nevadas. At least, not showing up super wet as we get into April. There's some other factors making me think we might switch a bit drier, or at least not quite as, hose turned on, super wet with a lot of snowfall in California as we end the month of March and get into April proper. If we look at forecasts over that same time period, again, March 20th to April 20th, colder for the lower 48. When you couple that with the rainfall signature we saw across the Midwest and parts of the southern and southeast parts of the country, again, just concern for tighter planting window concerns right now across the middle part of the United States. And then out west with that excess snowpack, we would expect temperatures to remain cooler out there. Jumping over and looking at the April-May, the seasonal forecast, April, May, and June from the ECMWF seasonal forecast. This came out at the beginning of March here. Also seeing something of an overlap here with excess rain forecast for the central and eastern Corn Belt, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, parts of Indiana, all the way through Arkansas, and potentially into the Mid-South as well. We're keeping an eye on this with the hope that as we get into May, maybe we open up the windows a bit in terms of getting the plant in for 2023. Just generally now the forecasts have been consistent on a wetter signal for spring, the whole planting window for 2023. We're seeing that. We're not seeing a big departure in that right now. But again, as we get into April and May, we're still talking about a 30 to 60 to 90 day forecast here. It's possible we could see a breakdown in this pattern, windows opening up for 10 to 20 days, just depends on kind of the short-term atmospheric signals and influences as we get into the planting window proper. As far as the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation, reading into this here on March 13th, We've seen it transition quickly in the beginning of March across the Pacific Ocean from phase 7 to phase 8. That influenced the extension of that Pacific jet. We think that's related to the recurrent series of atmospheric river events for California. It's expected to quickly move into phase 1. That's the Western Hemisphere, and potentially resetting itself in null space, or the circle in the middle of the graphic here. If it does that, I think that will help influence that pattern shift out west, where we see at least something of a calming down of the rapid onslaught of precipitation out there, kind of agreeing with what we saw in those ECMWF 30-day forecasts for precipitation. A quick update, if I could say that here, on the sea surface temperatures in our ENSO box, where we measure El Nino, La Nina 3.4. This region here, really La Nina totally fading at this point. We just see maybe a very pale signature of what was left of the multi-year La Nina event. Water's really warming up in the Eastern Pacific. They're warming up in this area of the Pacific as well. If we measure that Nino 3.4 index, we can see really from the end of January through February, we've been consistently warming up the ocean temperatures in the Central Tropical Pacific. On March 9th, last Thursday, the Climate Prediction Center, the CPC, officially removed us from La Nina status in the Central Pacific. So that was the categorical end of that multi-year double and triple dipping La Nina event that we saw. As far as the forecast for that La Nina, El Nino signature going forward, if I bring up the latest forecast from the ECMWF, strong agreement from a number of models, certainly the ECMWF here, that will be rapidly warming up those ocean temperatures in the Pacific potentially. As we get into May, June, July, and August, could be seeing an El Nino develop in the Central Tropical Pacific. Certainly, if those water temperatures keep warming up at the same rate over the next few months, we will be in an El Nino. Now, I will say, to moderate this discussion a little bit, if I take you back to February of 2022, we were expecting a similar warm-up in ocean temperatures, not quite as aggressive, but there was a chance that we were getting into potentially an ENSO neutral in the spring and summer of 2022. We did not see that come to fruition. We stayed down here with these cooler temperatures. That La Nina was very persistent in 2022 last year. The ECMWF has at times in the spring been too aggressive in warming up those ocean temperatures in the Pacific. Is it doing that now? I'm not sure. We've just seen that in the past. It's something to be mindful of. While I'm confident we are out of La Nina, we will not be returning to that. We just might not be moving into El Nino quite as quickly as some of these forecasts have suggested. I will say the other models are pretty good agreement that we're going to be warming up those ocean temperatures. The potential for El Nino exists there. It's just not quite a home run or a complete confident forecast right now. If you look at the Climate Prediction Center, there are ENSO probabilities as we get into June, July, August, September. Those El Nino probabilities are around 55%. In the fall of 23, rising up just above 60%, right? Just above a coin flip in terms of those percentages. So not, super confident that we'll be in an El Nino as we get into the last half of 2023. But as far as the other probabilities here, it is the most dominant one. So it's something we're keeping an eye on. How might that affect our forecast? Well, if I take you back to those ocean temperatures where we are at now, March 13th, if these continue to warm up, even, maybe if not to El Nino status, but something like a warmer ENSO neutral, that would reduce the risk of drought in the central part of the country. We're growing a lot of our crops here in the breadbasket of the United States, and really even for parts of the eastern half of the U.S. as a whole. These cooler temperatures here, just off the west coast of the United States, that's our negative PDO that we've held on to for a long time now. Now, the ECMWF model has this warming up as we go into the summer. If these water temperatures warm up, here off the Gulf of Alaska, off the coast of California, and we get that El Nino extension, those warmer ocean temperatures in the Central Tropical Pacific, we could see a very wet, consistent rainfall events across the middle part of the country. We're talking about chasing yields. If these water temperatures stay cool, or at least closer to average on the cooler side there, and we still get a warm up of ocean temperatures, that will moderate that above average rainfall chance some. It could maybe even offset it. We're seeing some models predicting maybe more of an average year in terms of precipitation across the middle part of the country. I think that might be part of the reason why. So we'll be watching these ocean temperatures carefully, how those warm up or not, getting into the summer of 2023. If we look at the ECMWF June, July, and August forecast for the summer, this has been out for a few weeks now, the seasonal forecast from the European model. They're sticking with that wet signal across the central eastern Corn Belt into the northern Corn Belt as well, even through parts of the Delta here and the soybean belt. I think that's partially connected to how quickly they're warming up the ocean temperatures, not only in the Central Tropical Pacific. We saw those aggressive El Nino forecasts I'm not showing it here, but we're also seeing the ECMWF warming up those ocean temperatures in that negative PDO region, potentially getting that back to neutral. Those are two wet signals if both of those come to fruition. So it's not a surprise to see this wetter forecast from the ECMWF. A failure mode for this forecast would be if we stick around in terms of those cooler ocean temperatures off the west coast of the United States. If we keep that negative PDO, that's a drier signal. Or if we don't warm up the waters in the central tropical Pacific, we don't get into it as aggressive and as an El Nino signal in the middle of summer, perhaps we might have to walk back some of these wetter forecasts in the central part of the country. That being said, still not as concerned for widespread drought in the middle part of the U.S. like we were going into 2022, although we do have that area of concern in the high plains, in the central plains, Texas, Oklahoma, western Kansas. Climate Prediction Center, their forecast for rainfall anomalies for summer, June, July, August, drier in the Pacific Northwest, parts of Montana, and they do have this wet signal as well, extending down through the southern Mississippi River Valley, up through the central Corn Belt, eastern Corn Belt, mid-Atlantic region. So they're leaning on the wetter side as well right now. Again, expecting those water temperatures to warm up in the central tropical Pacific. There's that wet signal. If we see an attendant or an attached warm-up of that negative PDO off the coast of the United States, the western United States, we could end up having a pretty good year here in the central and eastern part of the United States. That's all we have for you all here this evening. Thanks for watching.